Welcome to issue 33 of the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show. And boom, boom, baby, this is going to be good. Stevie?
Boom!
Boom.
Hey everyone, welcome to Pop XP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the Pop XP channel.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show. Issue number 33. We got my boy there, Steve. Look at this. Look at the point. It's going to be on point. And down below, we got Niall Scala from the Pop XP representing Billy Tucci. Niall, what do we got to say?
Oh, you know what we got to say, and that's it. You know, everyone look down. You're going to see that subscribe button. Make sure to click that, and don't forget to smash the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content like this episode. And gentlemen, you know what I love about comics? Whether you're a reader, whether you're a creator, we always have something in common, and that's the love of the characters, the story, and the love of collecting. So with that, my friends, what do we have going on tonight?
Steve, I got to talk to you. First off, I feel bad about this special guest we have today because I've been hounding him like General Ross hounds the Incredible Hulk. He's been leaping around the desert, just wanting to be left alone, but no. I come in with these Hulkbuster-based, specially designed weapons, and we clamp him down. I throw a rage cage on him, and then gas fills it up because he forgets to hold his breath and he passes out. Then I got you, Steve, Major Glenn Talbot, and I got Colonel John Armbuster down there transporting him here. Now, I don't want to say that this guy that we've brought here, has some pretty good accolades. You know, he's a writer, he's a producer, and he's done shows like Veep, little shows, right? Curb Your Enthusiasm, Seinfeld. He also created the Clerks animated series, and he also wrote for the Saturday Night Live. But that's not why we really wanted to trap and bring this guy here, because Niall said it best. We want to bring this guy here because we love comic fans, fanboys like us that do some extraordinary things. But this guy also has one of the world's biggest comic original art collections too, and that's pretty magnificent in its scene. Now, Steve, let me ask you something. Did General Ross on occasion ever capture the Hulk?
Yes, he did.
Well, we captured him, but listen. Ooh, the big bastard is up, and here he's coming. We can't hold him any longer. So without any further ado, the man, monster, myth, legend, and art collector, and a great guy at that, here comes Mr. David Mandel.
That is an introduction I'm not sure any man can live up to, but I feel like we should just quit while we're ahead. That was a great introduction. Good night, everybody, and thank you. I worry that instead of being the Hulk, I'm that weird combo of like Hulk body with weird puny banner head or something that was always so very, very off-putting to the audience, and they're just pressing other buttons, going to other channels. But anyway, hi everyone.
Hey Dave, actually we all have a look like. Steve always reminded me of Sal Buscema's like absorbing man, or maybe a little baby Thanos. You kind of remind me of Hulk 129, the Glob. Roy Thomas is the Glob. That's who you remind me of. And we're fighting and you're throwing me off the bridge. You remember that issue, Dave?
I don't. You've got me on
Oh!
129. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'll do
Such
some
a great-
research. I mean, right now, I'm sure that issue is just going up in value as we speak, having mentioned it here. So I'm sure it's going to be hard to get a good one, but I'll get one. I'll definitely get one. Every now and I used to hear, for whatever this fits in somewhere, people used to accuse me of occasionally looking like a young William Gaines. So there you go. There's an odd comic, whatever. I can only assume he was a fat guy. So there you go. Yes, there you go. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dave, for coming on. And Steve, why don't we start with you? Because I want to, like I said, I usually always start this, but let's start with you, Steve, because I want you to talk to David and let's embrace David in our love of comic fandom.
Well, David, it's a pleasure to see you again. Of course, we've met on many occasions because obviously we have some serious friends, all together in the same grouping. And I remember many, many years ago, when I was learning about original art, I would always say, "Oh, I wonder who owns that." And I kept hearing this name, and it was like, "Oh, that's Dave Mandel." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And then a week later, I'd say, "Wow, can you imagine that cover? I wonder who has that." "Oh, that's Dave Mandel." And I was like, "Well, wait a minute. He can't have all of the art. It's impossible." And everyone, no matter who it was, any art dealer, they're like, "Yeah, I sold that to him, 1993. I sold that to him, 2003. I sold that to him." So obviously our audience have no idea about the breadth of your art collection. But for right now, I want to get into the weeds because you wouldn't be buying original art unless you had started off reading the original material.
Yeah.
So
the
where
art,
did young Dave Mandel start his reading process?
Because I was going to just say the art is purely the nostalgia for the books, but it's even beyond the books, although the books obviously are a wonderful thing to have and to hold. It's almost the art is a way of recapturing whatever that first moment of whatever that issue is, whether I'm reading them at the dining room table, on the floor of my bedroom, at my friend's house, sometimes on a bus from the comic book store back to my house. It's that's what the art is. It's recapturing that first moment where you just go, I'm never going to forget that panel, that line of dialogue, whatever it is. That's what the art collecting is about. So for me, I grew up in New York City, city kid, grew up on the Upper West Side of New York. And my first exposure that I remember to actual comic books is a really early memory, which is I used to get my haircut at FAO Schwartz on I guess Fifth Avenue at the time.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
in the barber shop at FAO Schwartz, it was a children's only barber shop. I got my haircut by Mr. Rudy. And if you didn't cry when you got your hair cut, you got a comic book, because somebody that must have been one of the customers of the barbershop must have been a Marvel person or a Marvel marketing person, because they had the stamped comics, the comp copy stamped comics, but all of the weird license stuff. So it was like Shogun Warriors, Godzilla, Human Fly. It was that sort of 1970s, those books. Do you know what I'm saying? So there were a lot of books I never saw, but it was those books. So to me, Human Fly was the most important character in the Marvel universe as far as I was concerned. But that was my first exposure. Those were some of the first comics I ever kind of got. And then somewhere in there, there's the Spider-Man cartoon. There's, just starting to wanting to buy comics at a newsstand. Again, not necessarily with any regularity, not necessarily reading consecutive issues, but at least recognizing, oh, I want a Spider-Man comic. I want a Spider-Man comic, even though if I don't necessarily know the difference between Amazing and Spectacular and Electric Company, which, by the way, was another early memory, those early Electric Company Spider-Man ones. So that's kind of how I kind of got into it. And then somewhere when I was in early elementary school at a book fair, That's where I first saw those wonderful, both the DC and the Marvel books. For DC, it was Batman from the 30s to the 70s hardcover. They had a Superman, a Shazam,
Yeah.
and a Wonder Woman as well.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
for Marvel, and again, in my mind, it's all the same year. But if you tell me, no, there's a couple of years apart there. But for Marvel, it was, the Origins, then later on Son of Origins, the Bring on the Bad Guys, and then eventually like the Doctor Strange, and my real favorite, by the way, you mentioned Hulk, the Hulk, with the Bob Larkin cover, which I love.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. That reflected the
Which,
tales
by
to
the
a
way,
story.
I own that cover. I actually own the Larkin Hulk cover, and I own the Infantino Batman cover, and I own a Shazam cover to the Shazam one, but it's mostly stat. But I've tried to find those things when I can. I've been outbid, I've missed them, whatever. But that was really not just an exposure, but an immersion, because with those books, I got origins, I got breadth and depth and all of that kind of stuff. And somewhere
David.
in there, oh, sorry, go ahead. And I was going, and
No, I was
eventually I
just gonna
started
ask you
buying
something really-
regularly. Yeah, please.
Yeah,
Yes.
but I just wanted to ask you something quickly. That Hulk cover you were
Yeah.
just talking about. Do you remember in the comics, it was the John Romita drawings? Remember, they were like all the drawings. So when I was a kid and I saw that for the first time and I saw that it was painted,
Right.
I was like, oh my God, this is different. I was like, oh my, it was so incredible because I never saw superheroes painted like that. So, I mean, just the impression you got from it, it was so wild because it was so new. I'm sorry for interrupting you, but that's what I wanted to say.
But it is this funny. It's like it's a searing image. There was even a poster that sometimes you see it on eBay of that image that I guess was to advertise that comic or that book in bookstores and stuff. And it's funny because when I go back in my mind to that to those book fairs, the other thing I got was the box of paperback versions of the Ditko Spideys. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like they made like where they put two panels on each page, and there's like it was like a box set of like 4 or 5 of them that were basically like the first, I don't know, 10 issues of Ditko Spider-Man. So for me, Ditko Spider-Man just seared into my brain. That's Spider-Man, even though it was the 70s, and by all reasons I should have been looking at Romita or Gil Kane, but for me it's Ditko because that was my first exposure, was in those paperbacks, and then obviously the cartoon later, wherever that in there somewhere too. Yeah.
And you're from New York, so you were right in the pulse at that time of comic book. That's why I'm sure those book fairs were crazy, because I could never imagine seeing a lot of that stuff.
Oh, it was just so great. And then the other thing, which is sort of funny, and again, I never thought about this literally till this moment. A moment of what's the word? A breakthrough. You guys are good psychiatrists. I actually at those same book fairs, I bought a Saturday Night Live book. So oddly enough, not only did I buy these things that led to my collecting, I sort of bought this thing that led to, I guess, sort of my career. So those book fairs were very important to my my life, I guess. Yeah. So yeah.
Oh my God.
That's incredible.
So it's funny, like you say about those comics with the Shogun Warriors, the Human Fly, the Micronauts was also in that. That's when Stan Lee was. That's when they were starting to license. That's when the Spider-Man Japanese thing was going on, and they started licensing stuff. But barbershops, we've talked about this before on here. Barbershops were even when Steve was a kid, I was a kid, barbershops were for me, it was incredible because I saw those Fantastic Four cup. But it's funny how you say it's singed in your brain, because this is you. Dave, may I ask how old you are?
Yeah, of course. I'm literally I'm a week away from being 52. So I'm 1970.
Okay. So, all right, we're all basically the same age, and but what I'm saying is, one, how powerful those images were for kids like us. It just singed in all of our brains and kind of transformed us into it was like Steve always said it the best. This is how I knew I fell in love with Steve, is when he said, when I saw my imagination on the paper for the first time, and there was that connection there, and you did too. So you go to a higher level because yes, you get the comic books, but
it
there's
took me,
something.
but it took me a long time. I mean, and let me say two things. One, it wasn't always a higher level. In some ways, it used to be a lesser level. It was actually, when I started getting into comic art, it was easier and cheaper than books. So that's number
Oh,
one. It sort of did this, you know. I mean, maybe not as much as the highest end books, but comic art collecting, when I got into it, which was more mid, you know, like whatever, like mid 90s, I guess, was when I got serious, was a very reasonable hobby. It's gotten quite unreasonable, but it wasn't insane. It was actually, for me, I was a kid that felt like I had missed out on comic book collecting, which maybe wasn't necessarily true, but it was that thing of like, I can't afford, or I don't want a giant size X-Men. I don't have enough money in my pocket. But you can get a really nice page from a comic for like, $150, which is cheaper than giant size one. So it wasn't always the high end thing it's become. So that's number one. And number two, what I was going to say is, for me, you know, again, it was a gradual progression, meaning I was a reader. I'm still a reader every week, comic store or picking up comics one way or another every week. I stick with things like an old lady sticks with a soap opera. You know, there are books that I think are terrible and I still keep reading them just because I'm of the habit of reading them. Do you know what I mean? Which I'm sure you guys are well aware of. So I kept reading. I collected kind of, but I never had a great collection. I had all my comics, you know, I had all my stuff boxed and boarded. If anybody needs a Wally West Flash 1 by Mike Barron and Jackson Geis, I have 87 copies of that in mint condition. I believe that might get me a solid 87 cents on the open market, all 87 copies. So I had my collection. And then, you know, kind of luckily bumped into art at one point or another. And as somebody who, besides loving the comics and always having wanted to do it, but also a frustrated, not good artist, you know, those who can't collect, like, I don't know, the seeing the art, seeing the notes and seeing like differences and fixes and stats and something under the stat, and oh my god, Thor used to be up here but they moved him down here, and all of that stuff just appealed to me on so many levels, both the peeking behind the curtain, the nostalgia, as I said before, the like holding something that felt like I shouldn't be holding it in a great way, that when I found my way to art, which was a slow process, I was hooked. And like I said early on, it was very reasonable. And it was reasonably priced, and I had a ridiculously unreasonable job. I was working basically at Seinfeld, and I just bought what I wanted. It was a great time, but that was the course, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
Oh, it makes perfect sense. But it's funny when I'm with Roy and he gets those original arts of those pages, he still remembers every little thing that he did and what had to be changed. But when he gets it, but he goes, yeah, this is when I wrote this. And like, but it's funny how you say that, because on the side, when I see those with Roy, he tells me exactly what he saw, what he was thinking, and what he was telling them to do. So it's funny because
I will make the argument, and it's funny, you and I've talked about Roy sort of on the side once or twice. I've never had the opportunity to meet him, and I hope I will at some point. But I say this as a fan, I would be angry if he didn't remember exactly where he was, because for me, the reader at home or wherever I was, it read like somebody really effing cared. Do you know what I mean? So that's what came through. And the other thing I was going to throw in there, and again, some of my comic reading was all over the place, especially early on. So like in the late 70s, I was reading reprint books that I didn't know were reprints. So I was reading Marvel Tales, which I knew was a reprint, but I was reading also, they used to reprint the early X-Men in
Amazing,
one of those Amazing Adventures. Yes.
Yes.
And so I read a couple of issues of X-Men, of the Kirby X-Men, not knowing I was reading a book from basically the 1960s. And then one day saw that, like the old X-Men, you'll love the new X-Men, still uncanny after all these years. And I went, wait, what? And it was like one of those things. But where I was going with the Roy Thomas story was, I was reading, for whatever reason, I must have hit right as kind of Buscema comes on to Avengers with Roy. So
Ooh.
some of my first Avengers issues
Mm.
are Wasp and Yellow Jacket and Hawkeye becomes Giant Man and and some say the world will end in fire and and others say in ice and all of that and the Black Knight and all that kind of stuff. And so even though I was born in 1970 and didn't read the stuff on the stand, I read those things in reprint form on the stand. So if you were to ask me my all-time favorite version of the Avengers, that's my Avengers period, just because again, I didn't know the difference, and I mean that in a good way, you know what I mean? And by the way, unlike, I feel like if I tried showing them to my kids now, and I don't mean Roy's stuff, but a little bit of, let's say, dare I say, like the early X-Men stuff, I think the dated nature of that would throw them. But somehow, whatever year it was, 1977, it didn't throw me. And so I just thought they were as good as anything. But obviously, I think the Roy stuff obviously holds up on a whole other level. But anyway, but yeah.
Go ahead, Steve.
You know, it's fascinating hearing you say that because my experience is almost exactly the same as yours.
Oh, wow.
Now, of course, over in England, we couldn't get many American comics. We had our English reprints.
Right.
I had no idea when they originally came
right.
out.
Who knows? Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes
so
the combinations that they put in books, like you'd pick up a book and it'd be like Master of Kung Fu and an Avengers story from 1963. What?
Yeah. I mean, obviously in England, we had some crazy comics. We had Dracula and Planet of the Apes. Now, that's the
classic
book that's ever been published. But then again, when I would read the Marvels, I was reading some John Buscema, then there'd be some Kirby and some John Romita. Again, so I click into and I have a connection with you right there for not being an expert, not being able to piece it together. But later on, once I became aware, and I went to a comic shop and I did what most of us do, which is build our first back issue want list. Now, this is my next question.
Yep.
Obviously, after a while, you're earning some good money. When you had this money, did you go back and fill in the comics that you wanted?
Yes and no. The first San Diego Comic-Con that I ever went to, which is I had just started, I was 3 months into Seinfeld. I had moved to Los Angeles. I was like, I have the weekend off. I'm going to drive down Saturday morning to San Diego. This would have been 1995 is my first San Diego Comic-Con. And it sounds like a joke because I drove down that morning. I parked across the street from the convention center. I walked up to the front door, bought a ticket, went in, had a good time, decided to get a hotel room at the Marriott. Again, just whatever. And then the next morning bought another ticket, none of which would be possible now. But when I did go to that first convention, I went around the room and I bought Giant Size X-Men 1 and straight up until I think through Days of Future Past, through like 142.
Yeah.
In what I thought were really nice condition books, and they were solid. But if only I had like really gone to, because by the way, I wanted to read them. I just wanted to touch them and read them. The move that I failed to do was that if I had just walked around and bought every number one in a good copy, that would have been the move. I never did it. By that point, I had such good reprints and whatnot. I felt like I had to do it for the X-Men. Like I just had to, which at that point I was just beyond addicted to. I just had to. I didn't do it for the other books. And then I found the art and I was off. And again, the art made more sense to me. At the time, it had felt like, again, I wasn't looking for an investment, but it felt like I'd missed the bus, even though, of course, the bus kept going. So somewhere in there, yes and no, I guess is the answer. But the other thing I was going to say, wherever this I guess sort of fits in is, I like you, I sort of saw things. I didn't know what I was necessarily seeing. I fell in love with stuff, then eventually found my ways to comic stores, found the books and started reading the ones I liked from wherever they were. And some were good and some were bad. And some I went, no, I'm not reading this book. I like those old ones, whatever. I
Mm.
found reprints and things where they were available. I was also obsessed with things like, do you remember those like Olszewski indexes?
Oh,
Because
Mhm.
you
love
could
those.
because you could read
That's a
that,
Steve special.
you could
Yeah.
read those and you could figure out what you could kind of, it would take you through
Yeah.
a lot of issues that you didn't really want to bother buying again because they were like not important, but you wanted to see them. And you know what I mean? So I love those Olszewski indexes, the Gerber cover guide. Again, these were things that I was using for comic art, but I was also obsessing on them to kind of fill in my missing knowledge, if that makes sense. So I love
Wow.
that stuff. Yeah.
Wow, that's it. Go ahead, Niall.
Yeah, now I personally, I love comics. I've been collecting comics, but me, I'm actually more of a fan of process. I like collecting, even with animation, the animation cells, the character designs, things of that nature. So when you're looking at, you said you see that and you see like, oh, Thor was up here, now down here, and
Yeah.
things are changing. Is that what you enjoy? Do you enjoy actually, because you're collecting the
I
process?
do love that part of it. I mean, I definitely do. I love that sort of, I mean, again, this is the Marvel version, but I mean, I do love the notion of, whatever, Ramita's Raiders fix this or, whatever. And by the way, and sometimes I also enjoy, I mean, I've looked at so many Secret Wars variations where you just kind of go, I don't know, maybe Jim Shooter was having a really bad day and just changing stuff to change stuff. I don't know, but I love that concept that maybe that's all it was, because this cover looks as good as that cover, which looks as good as that cover. Why are there 7 covers for issue, whatever. So
Oh,
no,
yeah.
I do love that process, but I will truly, and it's a huge part of it. But at the end of the day, it is the nostalgia. It's the nostalgia of, I'll give you an example. This is an example I've talked about. I've written a little bit about it occasionally here and there. People have asked me. I had my appendix out in like 3rd grade. And when I was recovering from my appendix being out at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, and in those days it was pre-laparoscopic surgery. So they literally, they actually cut you open and you were in the hospital for like a week because it was a couple of days till they got you up. Then they started walking you slowly and you had to, it's different. Now an appendix, sometimes I think they send you that home that afternoon. But anyway, I remember reading the X-Men annual 5, where Nightcrawler gets killed and then they go down to hell, and it's a version of Dante's Inferno, and it's an early JRJR interior art, but Claremont, and it ends up connecting to Nightcrawler's origin story and his mother, the wizard, and all this stuff. And it is a great issue, I honestly believe. And it's lyrical and it's poetic and it's literate, because it almost requires you to like know something about Dante's Inferno, and if you don't know, to then look it up, which is, I love when comics make me do, or as a kid, made me do things like that. But I remember reading that book in the hospital. I can remember being brought that book as a bright moment of this thing that was not fun, but oh my God, someone brought me comics in the hospital and I read that comic. And so to this day, I have the cover. I've bought every page from that book I've ever seen. And I can't explain it other than because that's the book I read when I had my appendix out. And I don't know how else to explain that. And by the way, it's not because of the notes or the process, although I love the process, but at the end of the day, it's that story more than the process. That being said, I love the process. So I hope that's clear.
Dave, what's funny is when we first started talking, I loved how you still had that. Now, our podcast is based exactly on what you're saying. It's remarkable that you reach the highest levels of success, that you still have all that passion of how these characters, these stories were so powerful. Things that we knew when we were a kid, when people were telling you comics stink or you can't read them, but we were saying, no, you got to read them. There's so much more. Like learning Roy's, I called him sophisticated Stan. When I started reading Roy's and like, oh my God, he has some different meanings there. And it's like, now I get like, it was incredible how powerful that stuff was. And here, like I said, you're at the highest levels of success and you've never lost that. And you get in those pages brings that thing back. Let me ask you, Dave, is that passion, is that all that knowledge you soaked up from these stories, did that help you in your writing process when you started learning to write and then writing for the
definitely
the
a part of it is definitely 1,000% a part of what made me the writer I am today. I mean, I think number one, it falls under the category of, I think any reading is good. You know, they say that now, like, you know, when like, oh my, you know, I think back in our time, it was like, if your kid was reading comics, somehow that was a bad thing if they weren't reading books. And nowadays, I think they've come around to all reading is good. Just read something. So, you know, I think just in terms of like reading and vocabulary and again, not that I was sitting there as a 8-year-old going, I want to understand the 3-act structure, but a great comic has dramatic structure. It's just, it's all of these things that I was absorbing without necessarily trying to absorb or knowing that I was absorbing. And, you know, like I said, to this day, there are, I definitely think it was an effect every now and then when I'm writing something. And I wish I could think of a great one to bring up, but like something I'll end up like telling a writer's room, like there's this weird moment in X-Men where, you know, you just, you know, you thought it was Arcade. And then at the end of the story, it's revealed that it's Magneto. And like, and I'm just like, we could do something like that, you know, where it's not exactly that, but it's that, you know. And again, I'm not even talking about a superhero movie or anything. I'm talking about like a comedy, but I'm talking about the way someone enters the screen or something. And so, yes, a million percent. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Wow. You know, again, I want to go into the very nature of collecting original art. So,
sure,
when you are buying comics, there's a scarcity, yes. But, you know, back in the day, the print runs, you know, 300,000, you know, 200,000, 100,000. There's always going to be issues you can get. However,
yeah, no,
when it comes to the original art,
there a wonderful
is that one single piece. And many, many years ago, one of our good friends, Mr. John Dolmayan, when I first walked into his little warehouse in North Hollywood, he had a little print on the wall. And it was a Rich Corbin cover. And he turned to me and he said, Steve, I'm going to get that piece one day. And, you know, Rich Corbin art, that's pretty tough.
Yep.
So I remember I looked at him and I was like, well, that's a nice dream, John. But he goes, I'm going to get it, Steve. So 12 years later, he came in. He came in to see me and he goes, I've got it. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he goes, the Corbin piece. He goes, it popped up. I'm getting it. And I was like, and I said, well, what if someone bids against you? And he goes, oh, I don't care. It's coming. And he did. He got it. And so my question to you, David, is, was there this great white elephant piece of art that maybe someone else owned, you knew about it, and you were screaming and thinking, one day, and then it finally arrived? Which piece of art is that?
Well, I'm going to say a couple of things really quickly. I will answer your question. The one thing I was going to say is there's a wonderful, and again, I don't think it stokes or strokes my ego, but there is something as a collector that is wonderful about having one of one. You know what I mean? That it is just, there's something really pleasurable. We used to joke, you know, I collect also like movie props and, you know, toys, and I would sit like every now and then I sit on, like, I'll get invited to do like a Star Wars, like high-end toy thing. And, you know, people always know the rumor of the rocket firing Boba Fett, this very rare toy, except it's an incredibly rare toy. And it is incredibly rare. However, we would have like a group of like, 7 or 8 people, and it'd be like, who has a rocket firing Boba Fett? And all 7 hands go up. So it's kind of that thing of like, in certain circles, yes, things are rare, but it doesn't mean we all don't have an AF-15. You know what I mean? It's like, it's sort of that kind of a thing. And so that one of one is insane. I will say there have been a couple of things where they were definitely like, call them white whales, whatever you want to call them, where, I didn't even know where they were, where it was just sort of the abstract of, I don't know where this is. They don't seem to be in any collection I know of, but I want it. I'm going to find it. And I ultimately found them in private collections and worked deals to get them that were, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess maybe luckily for me now, not I just have to win it and beat other people at auction. I just had to make a deal that made everybody happy, but I did not necessarily, I wasn't going up against a lot of people. So that has happened to me. But there are pieces, I'll give you a good example, which is years ago. It was a Thanksgiving, which was the cover to, wait, where was it? Was it? Oh, no, it was a Sotheby's auction, I think. It was a Sotheby's auction. The Marvel Star Wars one, that both covers came up in an auction. I think maybe, I want to say they'd been owned maybe by that collector down in Florida, Bob Latimer. Maybe, I don't know why that's in the back of my brain. He's an old art collector, and they were coming up for auction in a big, I think, Sotheby's auction with a lot of great stuff in it. And it was just one of those things of, I'm getting these. There's just doesn't like, it doesn't matter. Now, again, I got very lucky in that I think if we were having this discussion about an auction last weekend, I don't know if I would have gotten them. But at the time, we're talking about, I think we're talking about the late 90s or maybe at the earliest, early 2000. And so I got them and I paid more than other people, but I think the number would disgust us all now. It's so low. So the answer is I've done it. I've done less of it lately, I guess, is the easiest way of putting it, because, now we are living in these times of, how does one say it? Multi-$100,000 comic art and $1 million comic art. And I guess what's hard for me, and I'm not saying this is logical, I'm just explaining it. I know what I paid, for example, which at the time was, say top dollar for the Frank Miller Daredevil 181 cover. I know what that was, and I know it would be a lot more today. I have a brain. I know how things work. But the fact that I paid X, when something I like comes along, and again, I can't think of a great example, but like, I don't know, just something I want, like a great George Perez Avengers cover. And I'm not picking on George Perez. I love George Perez. But when all of a sudden the current price of that is, I don't know, $200,000, and that's more than I paid for the Death of Elektra, it's my brain short circuits. And I'm not saying I'm right. I just, at some point you go through these phases, and I always joke the phases of a collector are, you kind of go from the, the idiot newbie to the, the good time Charlie, just sort of spending money. Then you're sort of the guy that everyone's talking about. And then eventually you're the cranky old man going, can you believe these prices? And I've entered the cranky old man phase of my collecting career, where I throw some bids on, they're blown by, and then I'm the guy going, can you believe $99,000 for a page from Sandman? What the, so that's where I am right now in my collecting. But I can think of 2 or 3 pieces that if they ever show, I'll probably just go for it with the knowledge that I'll just sell something. I have stuff that I can sell,
Dave, I want to take it back to Little Dave in the barbershop. I want to go back a little to talk, like I said, to talk about Little Dave in the barbershop seeing these comics. So those comics were around, we're talking 78, 79, that time. That time was so glorious because from 75 to like 1980, all those Marvel toys were hitting the toy shelves. with the beautiful promo art of Ramita and all that stuff, Hulk and Spider-Man. I grew up at that same time, the Hulk boom of 1977, and I fell into it like you wouldn't believe. Literally, see, Dave, you love the Hulk, Steve loves the Hulk, I am the Hulk. That's how my brain works. That's how
you
it
know,
works.
you guys were asking me about comics. Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt for a second. One of the things I did do sometime, like in the last, 20 years ago, when I first, like came out to LA and was working at Seinfeld, was I bought cherry mint, and I mean cherry mint, Mego figures, boxed and carded, both versions, all the vehicles, all the original Star Wars figures on the cards with unpunched holes. I mean, I rebuilt my 1977 toy collection. Absolutely. I had all of that, and I rebuilt
That's what
it.
you should do.
Yeah.
That's what you should do.
Yeah. But Dave, my actual question was,
oh yeah, sure. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Believe me, I love that too. And you maybe have answered it there, but what was the little Davy Mandel? What were the toys that appealed to him at that time that he want? Okay, we know Migos.
So Mego was huge, but again, I was an action figure kid. I loved Mego. I loved the Lone Ranger figures, the big ones, the Gabriel Lone Ranger. I had all of them. I think I had the town. I had the various adventure sets, where you'd get like a canoe and a poncho and whatever that the Lone Ranger could wear, and Silver and Smoke and Dick Deadwood, Evil Knievel. I had, the cycle.
This is Evil Knievel and the Evil Knievel shock-absorbing stunt cycle. You can make him do wheelies, backstands, even mid-air somersaults. And for that big jump, here's Evil, up and over that 4-foot ditch.
I had the van with the ramp that it could jump the ramp. I had that. Those were biggies. And then, things that were connected. So, even younger me, I loved color forms, and I had superhero color forms, and again, stupid stuff too. I mean, this is sitting on my desk to this day. It's, the dangler,
Ben Cooper.
Exactly.
The Ben Cooper
I love
jiggle.
that stuff. Yeah, exactly. So, that's the stuff. Again, whatever, circa 1976, 7, 8, that's the stuff I was buying. And then everything went Star Wars. When Star Wars comes out in 77, again, superhero stuff still super important, but everything takes a back seat at that moment to Star Wars. So, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So that's great. Go ahead, Steve.
So, I'm going to switch back to the art and the collector, that spirit within you, because something happened to me, and I'm just wondering if it ever happened to you. John got his favorite piece of art, and then I remember I mentioned to him, I said, well, my favorite piece of art is the cover to Hulk 216. It features the By-Beast, and it's by Rick Buckler. And he's like, that'll pop up at some point. And I said, it's impossible. It's never going to happen. It's a pipe dream. A couple of years ago, popped up in Heritage. And, John wanted to help me. He goes, this is your piece. He goes, you've been waiting 33 years for this, Steve. And, I asked around. They said, yeah, it's going to be between 5 and 7K.
30, 35K. Where did it go? Yeah. Worse.
John went to the auction, and then, he called me up and he goes, Steve, it didn't happen. Now, John's terrible for making jokes. You know how he is. He's terrible. Okay. And I just kept saying to him, what happened? What did you do? I said, I know that you probably pumped it up a little bit, didn't you? And he goes, I did. I pumped it all the way up to 17K. Now, when he said that, I went ashen, and I was like, I said 7,
right?
17. I was like, my knees went weak, full grown man. And I was like, and he goes, but I'm sorry, Steve, I didn't get it. And I remember it was the equivalent of someone just grabbing my soul and just ripping it to shreds. It affected me so badly that I sold all of my original art. and said,
Oh,
I'm
wow.
never buying another
Wow.
piece again.
I'm sorry about that. That sucks.
So I'm just wondering, is there anything that happened? Is there an equivalent for you where you were like, this is my piece, and someone came in and swooped it?
Early on, and again, it's like one of these days I gotta plant a flag exactly where things sort of change and the money changes, because again, there's sort of pre-collecting and current collecting, I get, or collecting before the money and collecting after the money. There was a piece, for example, I remember it was a John Byrne splash, with Wolverine on it, from the Hellfire Club, that I let get away. I just didn't go, oh, you know what? I got a better version. I got actually a better story. I'm sorry. I'm going to do an even better story. Years ago, I had an opportunity to buy the Marshall Rogers Jokerfish cover, which is one of the great covers
Of all
and
time.
I didn't make the deal, and I let it go. And I can only explain to you that haunted me. I mean, haunted me and haunted me and haunted me. Like, what was I doing? And then it made me look. And again, I didn't get rid of my stuff, but it did make me look at other things where I'm just like, why do I have this and I don't have that? That sense of things.
What's the point?
Yeah, but it was a different time, and it looped back around a year later, and I did pay more perhaps than I would have paid the first time around, but it was a mistake that was rectifiable, and I rectified it. So that's the honest answer. In these last couple of years, I guess I've been lucky in that there are definitely things that I could circle and point to and just go, I wish I owned that, but they are not, I don't know what the word is. They're not like deal breakers, I guess. Like I wished I had gotten one of the Watchmen covers, and I didn't. And I have in my collection one of the Watchmen trade paperback covers, which is different and not of the original run. And those covers are just very beautiful and abstract, but beautiful. And I regret it, but it didn't send me off a cliff. But I guess I have, I experienced something recently with movie prop collecting, which was an original X-Wing model from the original Star Wars, one of what they call a pyro model, which meant it was made to blow up. And while it did have some damage, they had repaired it to reuse it again. And so it was still sort of in one piece. So you're talking about one of the fundamental building blocks of Star Wars. And one of the things that, like, why is Star Wars so incredible? Well, they sort of introduced this way of shooting these models and whatever. And so I was like, I'm going to get this. Like, this is what I've been waiting for. An ILM scratch built model from the original Star Wars is the dream piece I have waited my entire movie prop collecting life for. And it will be the cherry on the top of my very good collection, but it is the piece that is missing. And it was a ridiculously high number. And I basically was like, I'm going for it. And I set myself a limit, and I started bidding, and I blew right by that limit. And then I set a second limit and a third limit, and I just kept going. And what was maddening was, as I'm bidding, and it's funny, I'll just simply say, I co-host my own podcast, The Stuff Dreams Are Made Of, with my friend Ryan Condal, who's the House of the Dragon showrunner. That's all about movie prop collecting. We don't really talk about comic art, so it's movie prop collecting, but we kind of, I sort of told this story in more detail. So if anybody wants to hear every body blow of it, but anyway, the long and the short of it was, whoever the other bidder was, they kind of kept stalling, which gave me this false sense of, oh, I think I've got him on the ropes, but I never did. And at some point, I kid you not, I had like bid. I mean, basically I had a list. I was going to have to sell almost, like, I hate to say this out loud, like $2 million worth of stuff to get this thing. I lost, and they just came over. They came right on top of me, and I lost, and it was this, and it was a very strange feeling, and I guess maybe it was the feeling of I've never lost before, which is, I guess, maybe a good thing or maybe a bad thing, but it was insane. And I felt like when it was all said and done, I felt like there was literally nothing else I could do. I was selling things I didn't want to sell. I was so above where I was comfortable, but I wanted it that badly, and I didn't win it. And I certainly, for the rest of that auction where there were other things I had marked, I fully just went, I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to bid on anything, whatever. Not in a getting rid of my collection and I'm never going to collect props again. But it was debilitating, depressing. It threw me into a solid funk for a really like a solid
I feel your
change,
pain.
because it was just that sense of helplessness of there was nothing more I could do. I literally bid $1.85 million and I fucking lost. And again, like, I mean, I'm talking the list of shit I was going to sell. I mean, there'd have been a flood on the market of Miller Dark Knight pages. I mean, I might have crashed the market. I don't know, but it was insanity. And I don't mean to be throwing the numbers around lightly or anything. I know they're insane numbers, and I'm lucky enough that I had this opportunity based on the things that I was able to. I was not going to reach into my pocket. I was going to use and sell other things to buy, basically. Right. But nevertheless, it was like a punch to the stomach. Like I can't catch my breath, punch to the stomach. And it bothers me to this day, but not in a, on the one hand, not in a, I'm never going to collect again. But at the same time, I've also come to the realization, like, I'm probably, that may be it for Star Wars. Like, I may just have to be happy with what I have, because my assumption is the next thing will only start there to some extent, which is depressing. And it's what's happened in comic art as well. So the answer is yes, but no. But, oh God, did it suck. Yeah.
Can see your wife is up to walk in. What happened to this side of the wall? Oh.
Well, I mean, I don't think she really would have cared if more of it was gone. But I do think that it was not a number she enjoyed hearing batted around carefree. I'll simply say.
Go ahead, Steve.
Again, I'm fully aware of that feeling of being deflated. And John said to me, he goes, Steve, if it ever comes up again, you know, why didn't you let me buy it for you? And I said, it's gone. I said, I don't want it now. I'm not going to put 25K or 30K into it. I said, it was a dream and it's gone. And I've let it go. And as I said, I did own some original art featuring the Bi-Beast. And if you go to the Torpedo Comic store, they're hanging up on the wall because I sold them to John.
Right, they're there. Yep. I mean, I get it. I get it. I'm sad. I'm a little sad because I still feel like I understand why that cover's important, but those pages, I think they meant, again, look, I don't mean to psychoanalyze you. I'm sad only because I think you'd enjoy having one of those, although at least if John has them, and I'm guessing if I know John a little bit, and he's a good guy, I think part of the reason he bought them is he feels like eventually, I bet you'll take one of them back at some point. He did, as opposed to if they went to Heritage, you would never see them again. So I do think that's John's ulterior motive. That you'll make your piece and go, let me get page 6 back. That was my favorite. I love the way Hulk stomped his, whatever. And you'll go, that will be the piece. But again, I understand it. It's just horrible. And like I said, I think there's more of that coming down the pike. I'm lucky enough to have, in my first 10 years of collecting, to have, gotten some things that I never thought I would own that would be impossible to own if they showed up now. And then there are things that I would love to own, like John. I don't think I'm saying anything out of turn here. John was helping Jim Lee sell the interconnected, the X-Men one, the 5 X-Men covers. Do I want that? Absolutely, I want that. Of course, I want that. I already said to you what X-Men meant to me. What I mean, that moment of X-Men, that X-Men 1. Oh my God, Jim Lee. Oh my God, all good things. But a number that was, again, we were just talking about the X-wing. We were and I think it was an even higher number than the X-wing than we were just talking about.
Yeah.
And as much as I liked it, it was just not even. I mean, I thought about it for 10 minutes, and I called him back and just said, "I can't do this." And again, I just that has become what collecting is. And by the way, I've made my peace with it. I don't necessarily love it, but I've made my peace with it. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
this may sound strange. Maybe you've never heard this before, but when I think of the art that you picked up and the art that you have in your collection, I'm very happy within myself. I get like a good feeling because you are a fan.
Oh,
You're not a cold banker. You're not someone that was a corporate
No,
entity.
I have no. To me, the worst thing that ever happened is that this shit is worth money. I got to be honest with you,
Yeah.
because it has interfered with A, getting more of it. B, it has interfered with just collector to collector stuff, where I used to be, and again, we're talking, and also pre-COVID, I used to be very open about, hey, yeah, come on over, let's look at comic art. And now it's sort of like, I'm never letting anybody into my place again, literally. So you become a worse person in that way. It's hard to lend stuff. All of a sudden there are these more comic art exhibits, and I've lent some things, but it's very difficult when you're lending something that, by the way, I paid, I know what I paid $2,000 for this thing, but it is now valued insurance wise at $200,000.
Mhm.
And I don't want to send it to Europe to go on display. I mean, again, even in a museum, because as we just said, one of one, if something happens to it,
Yeah.
I don't want $200,000. I want my cover. I don't,
Yeah.
the money
Mhm.
is, again, I don't want to say it's meaningless. Of course it's money. And I'm assuming the day after I leave this earth, the fire sale that my children have of the collection will be quite a sight. But I'm just simply saying, but until at least I'm gone, I am not interested in what it's worth. It's the least enjoyable part of it. Insurance sucks. Burglar alarms suck. Safes suck. It all sucks, that part of it. It's not fun. I wish
Yeah.
I want to buy more Steve Ditko art. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to one every 4 years, because, and that's,
Dave, I
Yeah.
love, once again, love the passion. It's so hilarious too. Let me ask you. So, okay, so you love comic art. Tell me some of your give me like your top 3 favorite comic artists. I would like so. Obviously, there's covers and stuff. But
No, I mean, and this is where it all connects. Obviously, because to me, the art. Don't get me wrong. I do have some examples of art where the art is wonderful. Like I have, for example, I'm lucky enough, I have a Winsor McCay Little Nemo in Slumberland. I do think it is
wow.
gorgeous. It is an incredible creation. All those things. I don't have the nostalgia for it. I learned about Winsor McCay in my 30s as I was digging into other things, and I found him. And so he's obviously super talented, but I am always going to fall back on the guys I read on this, that I read. And so,
absolutely.
I started talking about, like X-Men before, Byrne Austin X-Men, written by Chris Claremont, is just perfection. The modern version of Kirby that I think Byrne was doing, but with the sheen that Terry Austin brought to the Byrne art, there are moments of, you look at like Colossus in particular, or Wolverine's claws, or anything metallic in a page of X-Men. Sometimes it's the Danger Room or whatever. It looks like it's fucking shining. That's what Terry Austin's inks did to that stuff. And that's black and white, no color. It looks like it's fucking shining. So that's a team that what can you say? I mentioned Frank Miller, all the phases of his career, because they're so different. So to me, the Daredevil stuff is incredibly different from the Dark Knight and the Ronin stuff, which kind of are connected, which are of course then very different from the Sin City stuff that I also love. And then sometimes, like when he was in his Sin City period, he went back and did like a Batman Dark Knight poster, but it was definitely more in the Sin City style. And that's interesting to me. So, again, that's another guy. I mentioned Steve Ditko. He's an all-timer for me. I just the weirdness, the oddness, and again, to split him into the different phases, early on, the sort of scratchier, rougher look. And then when he starts using the brush more sort of post issue 21, and it gets a little more lush, even though Peter Parker is still nerdy, but just the way like it flows a little more, and the way he calls up, pages and sites. I love looking at a Neil Adams page, any Neil Adams page. It's just incredible. I mean, I will say this, which is there are a million things you can say about Neil Adams, obviously. And again, you're talking about books you remember as a kid. One of my other go-to books was the Treasury edition of the Ra's al Ghul storyline that had Robin, that with Ra's al Ghul's, the shadowy head, and then Batman, whatever. And I was able to, it's a two-piecer, but I bought that a couple of years ago. Cause again, the Treasury cover, I mean, those Treasuries I also loved. I'm lucky enough. I have the Alex Toth Super Friends Treasury cover, which is another one of my all-time favorites. But with Neil, whatever I was going with it is, and again, I love the Batman stuff. I love it. But I will just simply say that man does not get enough credit for the Havoc costume. Havoc's costume is one of the all-time great costumes in the history of comic Earth.
Dave, just so you just know, just this past weekend, me and Steve, we were in Vegas. I was with Roy. It was crazy, absolutely crazy. We always get the first appearance of Havoc comes through, and Roy said the exact same thing. He said he was telling the kid, like, Havoc doesn't get the credit. I mean, Havoc doesn't get the exposure he needs because Neil Adams did such a great job on the costume design. And when I asked Roy about, how when you see Havoc, and I love how, like, you always see the power pulsating from him, but it's always centered, no matter what direction he's in. He said, Roy told me, because I asked him about that, and he said that was Neil Adams' idea. He goes, and when Roy saw that, because they were talking about it, he was like, he loved that. And then it was Neil's idea to do that, because I wanted to know, because that was so uncommon. And Neil told Roy that the power should be pulsating from him all the time at that angle. So like, it's funny you said that. It just took me back, and it just happened. It was unbelievable.
It's so great. And look, I'm naming some of, like, again, I'm dating myself, but like, it's so funny. Like, there are guys that I think of in my mind as the newer guys, but they're like my age. So like, like Arthur Adams and Mike Mignola, who at some point to me were the new guys, but obviously they're not the new guys anymore. And, I have wonderful stuff by both of them, but God, do I love their stuff. Just the way they incredibly differently, even though they were friends at sort of a young age, just like the way they both go about sort of designing a cover or a page. I mean, just wonderful, just wonderful. So there's a million people. There's no, it's funny. I can, if I'm loving a book, I almost don't even care who the artist is. I mean, I care who the artist is, but you could put an artist that has not had much success on a book that I love, and I will buy that art. And I'm not judging that artist, but it is as much about, don't get me wrong, I love a pretty page, and I mentioned some pretty pages, but part of what I'm loving about it is the storytelling and the story. And so these things, I know the writers don't get shares of art anymore the way they used to. What did they used to get? Like every third page or something like that, the writers share. But I have very little art from stories I don't love, but I have art that a lot of people are perhaps not as interested in from stories I love, drawn by guys that the market has chosen to ignore. So, there are books that I'm like a nut for, like I love Legion of Superheroes. I love Keith Giffen. Give me Keith Giffen any day of the week on Legion. I don't care if it's not what everyone is looking for, that it's in the platinum section of Heritage. Do you know what I mean? And by the way, thank God for that stuff, because that's what does keep me collecting, so that there are things that I'm looking for from, runs, be it, 80s, 90s, runs that I liked. Like, I mentioned this before. I keep mentioning it because I keep hoping someone will, even if they try and rip me off, at least offer me a good one. I loved Denny O'Neil's Question run, where Dennis Cowan inked by Sienkiewicz. I would love a cover from that run. I would love a cover, but I want one that I remember. I want one preferably where he's wearing the longer jacket as opposed to the later kind of jean jacket. Again, I have a sort of one in my mind, or one or two in my mind. So come rip me off, come get me. But again, it's like, but honestly, at some point, hopefully in the next 5 years, I'll find that Question cover, and it will cost me more than it should. But with any luck, that more than it should is still well under, I don't know, $7,000. It's below that number. I will see, fingers crossed. But that is going to make up on some level for not even thinking about whatever, gazillion dollars on, Jim Lee's X-Men 1. That there are still those runs and stories that I love that I'm still looking for. I mean, I don't know what else to call it,
Dave, being such a fan, before I turn to Steve and Niall for their last questions, I gotta know. We always ask people, especially crazy fanboys like you, what are your top 5 superheroes? Come on, give me from 5 to number 1.
Oh, mine are so. I will give you from 5 to 1. Mine are. I feel like sometimes mine are so just generic fanboy, because it's just like it is just honestly, top 5 for me. Oh man, Alan Moore Swamp Thing.
That's a good one.
Very specific, and then I'm going to go one more step specific, because again, you can tell what I loved and read. So it's like Alan Moore Swamp Thing, Alan Moore John Constantine. I'm doing more than 5. I'm sorry. Somewhere in there should be the Black Knight, because I always love the Black Knight. I'm not sure anyone ever has done anything good with him in the last 30 years, but I always love the Black Knight. So somewhere in there, one of these days, maybe, I keep hoping the lost pile of Joe Maneely Black Knight art will show itself, because that would be just fun, just in a why the fuck not, like a Joe Maneely Black Knight piece. But then it gets boring, and then I'm just Batman, Spider-Man, and Wolverine. I'm sorry.
Oh, wow.
Answers.
That's great.
Yeah,
Go
I'm
ahead
sorry.
now.
Very boring. Very meat and potatoes. I'm sorry.
Give the last one to David now.
Yeah, so mine's just a quick 2-parter, because we need to know about the collection, right? So my first question is, do you have a piece you sold that you regret? And the second part of my question is,
the two times I've done that and I did regret it, I was able to go back out and get them back. And then, and so that happened earlier on. But nowadays, and again, some of it is because I'm lucky enough to have as large a collection as I have, there are definitely the pieces where I go, these are expendable, and I'm pretty good about making my peace. And when I decide that I've made my peace with something and I let it go, usually again to buy something else, that's part of it. I'm pretty good about that, where I could sit here and I can say to you, it'll come back up in an auction, 4 years later, and I go, oh, I used to own that. It's be like, yeah, I guess technically I wish I still did, but I don't regret it. So I've gotten better about that, of not regretting.
And what's the top piece in your collection?
It depends on the day.
Which one's going to the pearly gates with you?
There's arguably 2, like one under each arm. Is that allowed?
We'll allow it. We'll allow it.
Under my left arm will be the giant size X-Men 1 cover, just because, how could it not?
Oh yeah.
And under my right arm, I'm very lucky enough to have what is the? Oh God, I should know my numbers. Isn't that embarrassing? Hold on, I'm going to double check my numbers as I talk. I'm going to check. I have. I was lucky enough to buy many years ago well, there it is. Yes. So why can't I? Oh, there it goes. I have the Steve Ditko Spidey 11 cover, and it's pretty incredible. Yeah.
Wow.
And that'll be under my. That's under my right arm. So yeah.
Wow.
And
I always,
and
I always want to think it's the 12, but it's the 11 anyway.
And
Sorry.
just so you know, Dave, that original art for Giant Size X-Men #1 says a lot because obviously the mask was Wolverine was changed
Yep.
to the Batman look, and what's funny about that when I asked Roy about that, because he said Cockrum was already done with the art, and then when that was submitted, Kane just drew the mask like the Batman type mask,
Right.
and then Cockrum, when he inked it, liked it so much, so he went back and he changed
Into
it.
the book,
But what's so interesting about that is that change was there, and it's so historical. But Roy told me, he goes, it was just kind of a throwaway stuff, the X-Men at that time, and he always told me Gil was just trying to take. He goes, he didn't even pay attention. He was just doing stuff really quick, and he goes, he
Sure.
didn't even care, and it just
But I mean,
became such a crazy thing.
That book, I mean, again, I know all, you learn the lore, hearing those stories of whatever an international Blackhawks and all of that. I've read every interview that all the different guys have ever done on it. None of it really makes sense. I mean, you're going to sell books in Russia. I mean, again, it's like, okay, fine, international Blackhawks, whatever it was, they were trying something. God bless them for trying it. And the other thing about that, which, has been part of this thing, strangely enough, is I actually I bought that piece directly from Len Wein years ago before he passed away. And luckily before he had his big house fire. And while I truly love that piece, what I really love, and this is an additional piece of, I guess, nostalgia for me, is obviously for me, that was the book, as I said to you guys before, like that book is the book. But I also got to know Len, and that was a wonderful, wonderful thing. And so there's that as a part of it too, which was not something, I don't mean the Len part that I ever planned on. I mean, I didn't necessarily know as one went about collecting that, I'd actually get to meet some of these creators, these guys that I kind of worshiped, and then played poker with them and stuff like that. That has been, it's a very hard part to explain, but one of the best parts of this entire collecting journey, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
Oh,
Absolutely.
yeah. 100%.
And Steve, this is going to make you a little sad. In that Len Wein fire, that's where Hulk 181 went up in smoke and all that stuff too. Gone for the ages. So, Steve, one of the last questions to Mr. Mandel.
No, not all of it damaged, I guess. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say that. Damaged.
Yeah.
Not all. I mean, there's pages later in the book that are fine.
Yeah.
I mean,
I do
they're
know.
water damaged, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is
I know.
the cover gone? Is the cover gone?
Yeah.
Cover was not with the book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now, my last thing, it's not a question. I feel
It's a
sort of
statement.
weird saying this. It's some advice.
Okay.
I'm a little bit older than you. I'm 55. And if you look behind me, you see these boxes, which says CGC. And for many years, many people have always been asking me about my books. They're like, Steve, I was just wondering, are you going to be? And for many years, I was like, when I die, they'll be in my grave. I realize that's a stupid thing now. And I'm going to sell my stuff when I'm still sharp and I know what I'm doing. So when it comes to your artwork, to me, after you spending all those glorious years putting together that magnificent collection with all that passion, I think you're the only one qualified and responsible enough to sell your pieces.
I've left some very specific instructions for when the time comes. The difference with the art than the books, although obviously you can display a book, is the art decorates my life. I mean, in some ways, it is like in lieu of having, photos on the wall or a picture of a bowl of fruit, I have framed comic art, and therefore I can see it and enjoy it and whatever. And I truly do, I don't know what the word is, but I guess look at it, and not just look at the pieces on the wall, but go through the Itoya folders. And I do a lot of looking at it, which I do think is a little different than books. And I guess the other thing is I'm such a hoarder of other stuff. I have so many other things I'm trying to legitimately get rid of that I'm starting with that stuff. So I'm going to try and get rid of my Ben Cooper Star Wars costumes, like in the boxes that I have that too many of. I'm going to get rid of those first, and then I'll get to like art and stuff later. But I appreciate the advice. You're crazy, but I appreciate the advice. Yeah.
Well, Steve, like, I mean, Dave, like, it's funny because your passion is like, this is what I freaking love. I'm going to say I fucking love, because it's like how you say, like, everything can be going crazy outside and all that stuff. You can look at your art, you can escape for like 10 minutes, look at your art and find sanctuary in that. I used to go to, when I was young, when my life was going in disarray, I would go to a comic book store, not necessarily to read anything, but just try to find that energy and peace in there. And it's funny.
I always have that. I always jokingly say, like, you know, like when people talk about like why they like gardening, my gardening is like, oh, something arrived, I'm going to take it. I don't like the piece of plastic it came in. I'm going to put it in a nice piece of plastic. Now I'm going to make sure I'm going to write it down so I have it, my price paid, day it arrived, who I got it from. I'm going to update my information. Now I'm going to put it in here. No, I mean, it could go in this book, but it could also go in the X-Men book. And I think about that. And then I go, maybe it's time to reorganize the X-Men book more chronologically. I think I'm going to do that for a bit. And like, that's my puttering in the garden. And so very much, yeah.
That, see, it's almost like you can't teach that. It's like the smell of the comic book, the look, it just shows you how powerful this stuff really is and why it's amassed to the greatest and most successful movie franchise of all time. And back then in the 70s and the 60s, we knew it could be that.
It's funny. We knew it could be, but I honestly never thought they'd get there. Anyone would get their act together. Yeah. And by the way, I hate to say this, but when you watch the DC stuff that doesn't, you realize what a small miracle it was, if that makes any sense. Like it's crazy. Yeah.
So before I leave you, David, what were the Marvel movies right now? Tell me some of your favorite ones that kind of literally took back to little Davy Mandel in the barber shop.
I mean, again, I'm not sure there's anything that's that, surprising. I when the first Iron Man came out, I was like, whoa, I love the new Spider-Man stuff. I thought, and I say this, I was a little too young and I missed out on the 70s cosmic stuff. So Thanos, I know who he is. I read the Infinity Gauntlet, but I didn't, that for me, it was not a big, that was not a big one for me. And yet I love that sort of the two-part coming together there. And the other thing that I love about it is, while my kids will occasionally read a comic book, they love those movies. We watch the shows together. And they allow me occasionally to show them a piece of art I have that, like, where I can say, like, well, you see that moment from Thor, or, hey, they're going to do Hercules. Let me show you this Hercules thing that I have with Thor, because I'm guessing they're going to use that, whatever. And they pretend to care. And so that's been the best part of it. But honestly, I was most impressed by the two Thanos movies, because I didn't go into it going, this is the best comic ever. Do you know what I mean? Which in some ways sometimes is better, because Lord knows when they finally got around to making whatever that X-Men, when they tried to do their version of Days of Futures Past, and Days of Future Past to me is such a perfect little gem. And my sort of sense of this is the greatest thing ever made that movie even worse than it was, and it was pretty bad. You know what I mean? So there was something to be said for not caring about Thanos and then falling in love with Thanos a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. Steve's happy about that. Oh, and my last thing to tell you, what do you think of all that original art they used to put down in the 40s to cover up some spills on the floor?
I know you hear these stories sometimes. I'm not sure if we've gotten there with comic art, but you'll hear about like somebody like buying a house like in England, and like they open up the wall and the insulation is old movie posters or something like that. You hear those kinds of stories, and why not? Why not? Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. So from being such disrespected to some of the most respected art ever. Never thought possible. And really quick, when we were in Vegas, Roy was sitting down at the Conan slots machines and stuff, and I wanted to have him take some pictures with them, and I said, Roy, did you ever think you would see like these characters on like slot machines? And he said, he goes, when I convinced Stan to get Conan and all that stuff, he goes, you don't, he goes, not at all. And like now here they're just all over the world. And you know, it's just, oh God, it's just like, it's just so funny. Like just him seeing it, like they had no idea that this stuff would be that. And now here we are. You got Davey fighting, ripping people's head out for friggin' art. Unbelievable. But David, thank you for joining us. This is, I hope people got a side of Dave that, you know, we know he's an art collector. We know he likes us, but this is his, I hope they got to see your obsessive passion, OCD.
Either that or at least they have a question cover to sell me for 15 grand. Either way. I'm good either way. Yeah.
And Steve, last words to Mr. Mandel?
Yes, you know, it's been an absolute pleasure. And, you know, the way I think about it is when a piece of art goes into your collection, you know, it makes me happy because you're looking at it, you're cataloging it, you're having a good time, you're cultivating it. So I'm going to wish you all the best health. And also, you know, I can guarantee within the next year, you're going to get a question cover. I just sense it.
And David, hopefully hopefully next year when we come to California, we'll come out, take you out to dinner with me and Roy, and you can talk fanboy out with him and ask all those stories, and he can tell you all those little stories behind the art.
That would be wonderful.
I think you would really enjoy that. And so that offer's there to you. Cool. And now, last words to Mr. Mandel.
Yeah, just an infectious passion, you know, and I like hearing the way you talk about what you collect and what you do, because that's why we're all here, you know, and it's just for the love of it, man. It brings us joy.
I love it, Dave. I love it. So here we get Mighty Mystic Millionaire. Steve, get us out of here.
Boom.
Boom.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on Pop XP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at ThePopXP and over on Instagram at ThePopXP. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you soon.